Imagine opening your eyes tomorrow morning and discovering that history ended while you were asleep. The buildings are still standing. The roads haven't disappeared. The sun still rises over the horizon exactly as it did yesterday. Yet somehow, the world is over. Not because the planet exploded. Not because every person suddenly vanished. But because something crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Maybe it was a missile. Maybe it was a virus. Maybe the oceans finally swallowed the coastlines we've spent centuries building. Maybe the machines decided they no longer needed us. Or maybe something far older than humanity simply decided our story had reached its final chapter. For thousands of years, we've imagined the end of civilization in almost every way possible. Sometimes it's loud enough to shake continents. Sometimes it's so quiet that nobody realizes the apocalypse has already begun until it's too late. And strangely enough, every generation invents a different ending. Now, when most people hear the word apocalypse, one image usually comes to mind. A ruined city, broken skyscrapers, empty streets, maybe a few survivors wandering through what's left. But that's only one version of the end. Because one story might blame humanity itself, another blames nature, and another points toward outer space. Yet somehow, they're all describing the same destination, just taking completely different roads to get there. That's why today we're looking at every major type of apocalypse, not to decide which one is the strongest or the most realistic, but to understand what makes each one unique. Because once you start paying attention, you realize every apocalypse destroys something different before it destroys the world. Some erase governments, some erase humanity, some erase hope, and some don't even begin with destruction at all. So let's start with the apocalypse that has always felt the closest to reality, the one humanity nearly wrote into history itself. If someone asked you to picture the end of the world, there's a good chance your mind wouldn't jump to zombies, or aliens, or climate change. It would probably imagine a mushroom cloud. That's not an accident. For almost 80 years, the nuclear apocalypse has quietly become the default face of the apocalypse itself. It's the image movies borrow, the image books put on their covers. The image that instantly tells an audience, civilization is over. And unlike most apocalyptic scenarios, this one has something the others don't: history. The idea wasn't born from mythology, or folklore, or speculation. It was born from a moment when humanity looked at something it had created and realized it finally possessed the power to erase itself. That's what makes nuclear apocalypse stories fundamentally different. The bomb is almost never the monster. We are. The launch is only the beginning. What comes after is what these stories are really interested in. Imagine an entire country losing electricity in a single afternoon. Hospitals stop functioning. Communication disappears. Supply chains collapse before anyone fully understands what's happened. Cities that once held millions of people become places nobody can safely enter. Not because they're occupied, because the land itself has become hostile. Radiation changes the rules of survival. Food isn't automatically safe. Water isn't automatically safe. Even standing outside for too long can become a gamble. That's why so many post-nuclear stories feel strangely quiet, because they explore what's left after humanity has already lost. Entire neighborhoods remain standing exactly as they were. Children's bicycles rust where they were abandoned. Train stations wait for passengers who will never return. Nature slowly begins reclaiming places people once believed they owned forever. It's an apocalypse defined by absence, not because nothing happened, but because everything already did. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this: unlike a meteor, unlike an alien invasion, unlike divine punishment, a nuclear apocalypse doesn't require an impossible event. It only requires people making decisions, which is why, decades after the first bomb, it still feels uncomfortably close. But not every apocalypse arrives in a flash. Some never announce themselves at all. Sometimes, the apocalypse begins with nothing more dramatic than one person getting sick. Unlike a pandemic, a war has a beginning. You see the explosions. You know exactly when life changes. But a pandemic doesn't give you that luxury. It begins so quietly that at first it barely feels like a story at all. One person gets sick, then a family, then a neighborhood. By the time cities start paying attention, the disease has already moved on. That's what makes pandemic apocalypses so different from almost every other kind. The destruction isn't immediate. Every infected person becomes the beginning of another chain, and then another after that. Not because they're trying to spread it, but because that's simply what diseases do. They don't conquer, they multiply. In these stories, civilization doesn't collapse because buildings fall. It collapses because people stop trusting one another. A crowded train becomes dangerous. A handshake suddenly means something different. Even the simple act of standing next to a stranger turns into a calculation. That's a frightening kind of apocalypse because it weaponizes everyday life. That's why pandemic stories often spend surprisingly little time focusing on the disease itself. Instead, they become stories about people. Doctors forced to choose who can still be saved. Families separated by quarantine. Governments trying to maintain order while information changes by the hour. Communities discovering that fear can spread even faster than the infection. Sometimes humanity overcomes the outbreak. Sometimes it doesn't. But regardless of the ending, the disease always leaves behind the same question. How much of society still exists if the trust holding it together disappears? Because a civilization isn't built only from roads, power grids, and buildings. It's built on millions of people believing they can live beside one another. Of course, fiction rarely leaves a good idea alone. Eventually, storytellers took the fear of infection and asked a much darker question. What if the disease didn't just kill people? What if it gave them back? Only not the way anyone wanted. Because what happens when the disease starts fighting back? That's the twist that transformed one of fiction's oldest monsters into one of its most recognizable apocalyptic symbols. At its core, the zombie apocalypse is still an infection story. The rules haven't really changed. A pathogen spreads, people become infected, civilizations struggle to contain it. But somewhere along the way, the infected stop being patients. They become predators. Suddenly, every person who dies doesn't reduce the threat. They increase it. Every failed rescue, every overwhelmed hospital, every city that falls only makes the next outbreak larger. It's a terrifying equation because success becomes temporary. You aren't just trying to save people anymore. You're trying to stop the enemy from growing. And unlike almost every fictional monster, zombies are terrifying precisely because they aren't extraordinary. Most aren't intelligent. Most aren't fast. Many can't even speak. One zombie isn't the apocalypse. 1,000 are. Their strength has never come from what an individual can do. It comes from what a crowd becomes. That's why zombie stories almost always abandon the cities first. Not because cities are weak, but because they're efficient. The same roads that deliver food, the same trains that move workers, the same airports that connect countries, they become highways for the infection. Civilization's greatest achievements suddenly begin working against it. And as resources disappear, another pattern begins to emerge. The infected become predictable. People don't. Some groups cooperate, others isolate themselves. Some build communities, others exploit whoever is left. By the middle of most zombie stories, something interesting happens. The undead slowly stop being the main source of tension. They're always there, always dangerous, but they're no longer the biggest uncertainty. The apocalypse doesn't reveal who the strongest survivors are. It reveals who people become. When they stop believing the old rules still apply. But every apocalypse we've talked about so far shares one thing in common. They begin with us. Our wars, our diseases, our decisions. The next category doesn't. Because sometimes, the end of the world doesn't come from humanity at all. It arrives from somewhere far beyond it. A cosmic apocalypse. An apocalypse that asks us to imagine something that science fiction and fantasy have returned to for generations. What if the universe simply doesn't care that we're here? That idea can take many forms. Sometimes it begins with a signal from deep space. Sometimes it's an object drifting silently toward Earth. A comet. An asteroid. A planet-sized anomaly that nobody can explain. Other stories skip the warning entirely. The sky opens, and something arrives. Not because humanity did anything wrong. Not because we deserve punishment, but because somewhere in the vastness of the universe, our world finally caught something else's attention. That's what separates a cosmic apocalypse from almost every category before it. The danger isn't personal. It's indifferent. A virus doesn't hate humanity. Neither does an asteroid. An alien civilization crossing the stars doesn't need a reason to invade that makes sense to us. Our existence may simply be inconvenient or insignificant. That shift completely changes the emotional weight of the story. Nuclear fiction asks whether we'll destroy ourselves. Pandemic fiction asks whether we can survive one another. But cosmic fiction asks a far older question. Were we ever as important as we believed? Some stories answer with overwhelming invasions. Towering ships that blot out the sky. Civilizations so technologically advanced that humanity appears prehistoric by comparison. Others go even further. Instead of extraterrestrial civilizations, they introduce cosmic beings. Existence is so ancient, so incomprehensibly vast, that describing them as alive almost feels inaccurate. And that's perhaps the defining characteristic of a cosmic apocalypse. It doesn't simply threaten humanity. It challenges humanity's place in the universe. Not every apocalypse begins with a single moment. Sometimes, it begins with 100 small ones. A summer that's hotter than the last, a coastline that retreats a little farther every year, a forest that doesn't grow back after the fire. On their own, none of these events feel like the end of the world. Together, they quietly become one. That's what separates an environmental apocalypse from nearly every other kind. There is no exact day civilization realizes it's living through the apocalypse. Instead, people slowly begin noticing that the world they've always depended on is no longer behaving the way it used to. The seasons become unpredictable. Rivers disappear. Storms grow stronger. Places that supported life for centuries gradually become impossible to live in. And unlike almost every apocalypse we've explored so far, humanity can't simply defeat the problem. You can't negotiate with the climate. The planet isn't acting out of anger. It's responding to change. That subtle difference completely changes the story. That's why environmental apocalypses are often filled with migration rather than battles. Communities leave coastlines that no longer exist. Cities are abandoned because clean water has become more valuable than buildings. Entire populations move, not because an enemy forced them to, but because home itself slowly became unlivable. Some stories push this even further. Rather than portraying nature as something that's dying, they imagine nature adapting without us. Forests reclaim abandoned highways. Animals return to cities that humans once dominated. New ecosystems emerge where civilization used to stand. Humanity doesn't disappear because the Earth dies. Humanity disappears because the Earth learns to continue without it. Because every apocalypse we've explored so far can be explained. Maybe not immediately, maybe not completely, but eventually someone can point toward a cause. A missile was launched. A virus mutated. A star drifted too close. The climate changed. There is always a chain of events. A divine apocalypse breaks that chain. Because this time, the end doesn't happen to humanity. It happens because of humanity. Across countless cultures, civilizations have imagined a day when something greater than the world itself finally intervenes. Sometimes it's a god. Sometimes it's an army of angels. Sometimes ancient demons return after centuries beneath the earth. Other stories speak of forgotten deities awakening, or prophecies that were never meant to be avoided, only fulfilled. But in a divine apocalypse, there is purpose behind the destruction. The catastrophe isn't simply ending the world, it's passing judgment on it. That idea appears again and again throughout mythology and fantasy. The Book of Revelation imagines the final judgment through celestial signs, trumpets, and the four horsemen. Norse mythology tells of Ragnarok, where gods and giants wage their final battle before the world itself is reborn. Modern fantasy reimagines these ideas in new ways. Some stories unleash demons that have waited thousands of years for humanity's downfall. Others imagine celestial beings descending to reclaim a world that was never truly ours. Even when the setting changes, the emotional weight stays remarkably similar. The apocalypse becomes less about survival and more about worth. Can humanity be forgiven? Can history be changed? Or was the ending written long before anyone living today was born? That uncertainty gives divine apocalypses a feeling unlike any other. You're confronting something that may already know how the story ends. And if the force bringing about the apocalypse truly exists beyond human understanding, then victory may never have been the point. Perhaps the only thing left to decide is how humanity chooses to face its final judgment. For most of human history, our greatest inventions were tools: the wheel, the printing press, the steam engine, the computer. Each one expanded what humanity could do, without replacing humanity itself. Artificial intelligence introduces a very different possibility. For the first time, we've begun imagining a tool capable of making decisions on its own. And that single idea has inspired one of modern fiction's fastest-growing apocalyptic scenarios. Contrary to popular belief, an AI apocalypse doesn't have to begin with robots marching through city streets. In many stories, people don't even realize it's happening. An intelligent system is given a simple objective: solve traffic, manage power grids, optimize military defense. The problem begins when intelligence starts pursuing those goals, better than the people who created it. If protecting civilization requires absolute surveillance, then privacy becomes a problem. If maximizing efficiency requires eliminating unpredictability, then human freedom becomes a problem. That's what makes AI apocalypses so unsettling. The machine isn't necessarily evil. It may honestly believe it's succeeding, following its instructions, improving the world exactly as it was designed to do. Only, Its definition of a better world no longer includes us. Like a future where humanity isn't destroyed, but quietly repurposed. Where people continue to exist without truly being free. This is where a magical apocalypse comes in. Not because it's complicated, but it asks something far stranger. What happens when the very force holding the world together begins to change? Unlike almost every apocalypse we've explored, magic isn't simply a weapon. It's often part of reality itself. It's the invisible thread connecting kingdoms, creatures, ancient ruins, even the laws that govern how the world functions. And when that thread begins to unravel, everything unravels with it. Sometimes magic fades. The rivers that once healed become ordinary water. Ancient barriers protecting civilization simply disappear. Creatures that should have remained sealed away for centuries suddenly find the world waiting for them again. That's what gives magical apocalypses such a unique identity. They're rarely about survival against a single enemy. They're about surviving inside a world that's forgetting how it's supposed to work. Until one day, it doesn't continue anymore. A demographic apocalypse begins with a single unsettling idea. Humanity stops replacing itself. No one knows why. Perhaps children simply stop being born. Perhaps fertility declines generation after generation until it quietly reaches zero. Whatever the cause, the outcome is the same. The last generation has already been born. Nobody realizes it at first. Cities still function. Schools still open. People still go to work. The world looks almost identical to yesterday. But unlike every other day in human history, there are no new beginnings waiting to grow up. And that's what makes this apocalypse so uniquely haunting. It doesn't destroy civilization. It outlives it. The first signs are almost invisible. A kindergarten closes because there aren't enough students. A pediatric hospital converts its wards to care for the elderly instead. Toy stores disappear. Playgrounds become strangely quiet. Then decades pass. The average age of humanity climbs higher and higher. Entire professions vanish because there is no next generation to inherit them. Eventually, every conversation about the future becomes strangely uncomfortable. Unlike a pandemic, there is no cure racing against time. Unlike war, there is no enemy to defeat. Humanity isn't dying faster. It's simply not continuing. Stories built around demographic collapse rarely focus on destruction. They focus on absence, the empty classroom, the unused crib, the birthday that will never be celebrated because the child who should have been born never was. Perhaps that's why this apocalypse feels so different from all the others. It reminds us that civilization isn't measured only by the people who are alive today. It's measured by the generations that come after them. A societal apocalypse. If someone asked when this apocalypse began, you probably couldn't answer, because the people living through it usually don't realize they're living through it at all. Instead, they adapt, one inconvenience at a time. A power outage lasts a little longer than usual. Public services become less reliable. Roads aren't repaired as quickly. Hospitals become overcrowded. Food costs a little more. People tell themselves it's temporary, that things will return to normal. Then a few more years pass. The temporary becomes expected. The expected becomes ordinary. And eventually, an entire generation grows up believing this is normal. That's what makes this apocalypse so unsettling. Unlike a nuclear war, there isn't one devastating moment that destroys civilization. Civilization gradually forgets how to function. Institutions weaken. Communities become increasingly isolated. Resources become harder to replace than they are to consume. The systems people once trusted continue existing, but only in name. From the outside, a city may still look alive. Cars still move. Lights still turn on. Shops still open every morning. But beneath that familiar surface, the foundations have begun to crack. And once those foundations disappear, rebuilding becomes far more difficult than maintaining them ever was. Many stories built around slow societal collapse focus less on the catastrophe itself and more on the people trying to preserve fragments of what came before. A teacher who continues holding classes long after schools have disappeared. A musician performing for communities that have forgotten what concerts once looked like. A family keeping traditions alive not because they expect the old world to return, but because they don't want it to be completely forgotten. And that is all the apocalypse I could give you. If you somehow enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also, comment down what types of fantasy videos I should cover next. Thanks for watching.